With me now, with perspective from Washington, is Democratic Congressman from Michigan, Dan Kildee. Representative Kildee, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's good to be on.
So we have the president, as you know, who has requested this $3.7 billion in emergency funding to deal with the crisis. Yesterday, the Republican chair of the House Appropriations Committee balked at that figure and said that not everything needs to be dealt with immediately. Did the president overreach with that figure?
Well, I don't think so. Obviously, we need to deal with this problem, and it's certainly a much less expensive prospect than what the Senate passed in their immigration package with $30 billion on the border. But if Mr. Rogers or other members of the Republican conference have another idea as to what we need to do and how much we need to spend to achieve that, we should have that conversation. I think the point the president's making is that we can do something about this. We can deal with this humanitarian crisis. We can speed up the process of adjudication of these cases and get those that need to be sent back, and provide shelter and some security for those that really do need asylum. I think the question is, what will it take to do it? And Mr. Rogers has another idea as to what it should cost. I think we're open to suggestion.
Well, I do want to break down this figure, this $3.7 billion, because the largest allotment, sir, goes to HHS for housing and taking care of the children. The rest goes to things like increased enforcement and prosecutions, hiring more immigration judges and attorneys to deal with all the backlog, repatriating the immigrants back to their home countries, picking up on what you just said, having to do that safely for them. But are there other needs that you can see that are being lost in this massive appropriation request? Are there things that you would want to see added?
Well, what I would like to see is a comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, the need for this stopgap measure is really precipitated by the fact that we haven't dealt with immigration reform. So I think the elements that the president have proposed make sense for this particular crisis. But until we take a look at the bigger picture, deal with border security, deal with the broken visa system, deal with this question of how we deal with how we address asylum seekers, provide more resources for immigration courts so that we can process cases in a more timely fashion. What's included in the package, I think, are the right elements, but it certainly is no replacement for comprehensive reform. So that, if I had my choice, it would be that this crisis, to the extent that it is a crisis, would move Congress to do what it should have done a long time ago, and that's take up comprehensive immigration reform.
Interestingly, as we look at all the details, especially the part with the portion to the State Department, that allotment in part is going towards helping Central American governments identify the underlying problems causing the exodus. Can money from the United States really help that issue? Is that our responsibility?
Well, whether it's our responsibility or not, it's a responsible way to try to stem the tide, because if we don't deal with it at the source, if we don't deal with trying to minimize the number who are coming to the borders that are perhaps not legitimate asylum seekers, then we're going to have to pay perhaps more and do more to deal with addressing those cases when they come. So, this is one of those questions where one could argue that these are not our responsibilities, but there are consequences for failing to act. Just as there are consequences for failing to deal with immigration reform, there would be consequences for not trying to address the problem at the source. And those consequences will be more people coming to the border, more cases that we'll have to adjudicate, more people that will need temporary shelter, and that comes with a big price tag as well. So the question is, what's the most prudent way to use the resources we have to deal with this problem? And I think what the president has suggested makes sense.
Congressman, I know you're familiar with that which happened in Marietta in Southern California near San Diego, where residents and outsiders came into the town and turned around buses that were headed there for processing, if you will. There is a proposal, as you know, from a social services group to create a facility in your district to house some of these children. There was a meeting in the town of Vassar this week. It got pretty heated, we're told. What's the status of that, and what has been the reaction among your constituents?
Well, first of all, there's been no decision about the facility in Vassar. It's operated by an organization called Wolverine Human Services. They have a very good reputation, but no decision has been made. The reaction has been, fairly predictable. A lot of the loudest voices are those who are pushing back against this. Many of them come from outside my district, but some from within. The problem, I think, is that all the extreme speech, and this comes from members of Congress in Washington, unfortunately, but also talk radio, other voices. All the extreme speech, I think, has fanned the flames of this reaction in a way that is just completely inconsistent with the reality. These are children, for the most part, who have been victims or could be victimized who are seeking asylum in the United States, in the tens of thousands, not millions. It's not an invasion. All this extreme language being used by politicians in Washington to try to curry favor with the base for the November elections has consequences. And so I think much of the reaction would be far more rational if we didn't have people in Washington fanning those flames. The vast majority of people that I speak to in my home district, they're compassionate. They understand this is a problem that we need to deal with. They understand that children who are victims ought to be protected. But there are those voices out there that are susceptible to extreme speech, and they seem to be dominating the airwaves, unfortunately.
While the president was in Texas on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, do you wish he had gone to the border and checked things out firsthand?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think whether he goes to the border or not changes the basic dynamic. Would I have suggested that he go to the border? Probably. But I think much is being made of whether he goes to the border. He sent to Congress a request for $3.7 billion to address the problem. That's what he should be about doing, trying to fix the problem. But, you know, for the optics of it, would it have made a difference? Perhaps. You know, I just think sometimes the focus is not on fixing the problem, but, you know, as we always hear, fixing the blame. And to point out that the president failed to go to the border when to do is come up with a solution to the problem, I think the focus is on the wrong point.
But as much as this is a crisis with immediate needs, sir, and this is an election year, and even in non-election years, Washington moves at a glacial pace, if at all, then there's 2016. Is it foolish to think that we are going to have real immigration reform anytime in the near future?
Well, I mean, I hope that this crisis would get Congress to think about that, but I don't see anything moving the Republican leadership. And that's really where the bottleneck is. Let's face it. The Senate has passed immigration reform. We have a bill. I've co-sponsored it in the House. It's up to the Republican leadership. Here's what I suggest. Cancel the recess. If Speaker Boehner doesn't feel we have enough time to take this up, cancel the recess. Monday morning, go to the floor of the House, announce that we're canceling the recess and we're going to take up immigration reform. We could get it done. It's not that we don't have time. You know, to me, there isn't anything that would prevent us from taking this up except the will to do it.
All right, Representative Dan Kildee, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Ahead, the prodigal son